Welcome back. In this section we're going to be looking at some drum and percussion techniques which I've split into two separate parts. In this first part I'll be using samples from my Ambient and Cinematic sample pack series, and all processing will be done using native FL plugins, so that should be accessible for everyone watching. I'm using the terms drums and percussion quite loosely here because you'll see that even though the pattern is clearly rhythmic and percussive, the sounds themselves come from non-traditional sources such as environmental recordings or foleys as they're often referred to. If you feel like making use of similar techniques once you finish this video, your best bet is to get a mic or a portable recorder so that you can begin to build your own foley library. Even a mobile phone recording can often suffice for these types of sounds. Of course, there are plenty of sample libraries already crammed with this type of material, so it's entirely up to you. I'll begin by playing everything in its full context with the bass and the atmosphere, and then I'll solo out the percussion on its own. Now I'll play the percussion dry just to demonstrate what a change some basic processing can make to the most simple of sounds. As always, let's go through each element individually, beginning with the kick drum. This is just your standard kick drum and I've applied minimal processing. It has an EQ that removes some of the more boxy frequencies around the 400 range, and also some of the more thumping frequency around 120 Hz. Every kick is individual and will usually require individual processing, so these particular values are determined by the unique properties of this kick drum. I'll play it before and after to show you the change, although it is quite subtle at this point. And now with the EQ. And here's the pattern for this. I've created a sort of syncopated rhythm here by throwing in quieter hits just before the downbeat. These are low in velocity because otherwise it would become a bit overpowering. So the next sound in the playlist is a hand clap that I recorded, which sounds very basic on its own, and so to compensate I've used a fair amount of delay and reverb. So let's play before and after just to demonstrate. There's not much to cover here as we've already looked at delay and reverb very extensively in these tutorials, but as you can hear, I've chosen quite atmospheric settings for this with quite a long feedback on the delay in particular. Moving on, we have a different kind of sound. I recorded the shutter going off on my camera and used it at intervals as a little embellishment to the pattern. Implementing more unique sounds like this to your percussion patterns can help give it a sort of nice character, and so if you can think of similarly unique sounds to record, then by all means try bringing them in and experimenting. I don't have any processing in this one apart from the default EQ that cuts some low and high end out of it. Now, EQ in these samples can actually be quite important because you'll often find that with recordings like this they usually pick up a considerable amount of hum or low frequency, and if you don't cut it off and you continue to layer things up, then you'll probably start to lose some headroom eventually, even if you can't audibly notice a difference. So let's play the sound before moving on. The next sound is one of my favourites, and it's a recording of a pair of scissors. I've chopped it up a little in the playlist to keep it more in time, but you'll hear that it still retains a very loose quality to it that isn't always perfectly in time. Having this sort of swing or looseness to your patterns often makes them much more enjoyable and rhythmic. Play around with timing and velocity to keep things changing over the course of the pattern. The only processing on these is the EQ, but also a phaser to create just a very subtle sweep in the background. What I'll do is play the original dry recording with no effects, and then I'll put them back on and play the chopped up version here in the playlist. So here's the dry. And now chopped up with effects. So the next sound is a pair of keys that I recorded and added reverb to afterwards, which has a bit of a pre-delay on it to create an extra bit of rhythm in the grand scheme of things. I've also pitched these down an octave because they sounded a little too similar to some of the other Foley sounds, so that helped to differentiate them a bit. This sound is more of an extra backing texture, so I'll play it and just move on. Next up we have a pair of very simple toy chimes, and I've used these here again as a backing atmospheric texture at different intervals. I'll play the dry sample and then the wet version. We'll take a look at more tonal sounds like this in just a minute, but if you can find any recordings or things to sample with an obvious tonal component, this can really help to give the percussion a bit more musicality. Next up we have the claps and snares, which are again from my sample pack. To create these originally, I remember layering all sorts of sounds together on top of quite typical snare or clap foundations. So I'd layer things like the sound of paper being scrunched up, or drawers closing, or even glass smashing, any sort of textural element that I could layer on top of the basic foundation just to give it more character. In this case I just have an EQ on both of the sounds to cut out some high end, as I found overall there was just a bit too much going on in the high region of things. So let's just play it through. And finally we have another tonal sound, which is one of the more important elements. This is a combination of a sine wave, tom hit and a kalimba, all layered and then mapped across the keyboard, exactly the way that we've seen in previous videos. The end results in a nice tonal percussive sound that can be used melodically to weave in and out of the pattern and really help tie the whole rhythm together. I'll play a dry C note to begin with and then play the whole pattern with the effects on so that you can see how it turned out. So one final time, let's go through each pattern in the playlist, turning each one on individually, just to show you how this all came together.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content, and if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.